Take this and leave. My mother-in-law, Janet, screamed, shoving a stack of papers into my hands. Divorce papers. I stood there, holding the documents while biting back the urge to laugh. She had no idea how ironic this moment was. Janet believed her son, Brian, was the breadwinner, the successful one, and I was just a lazy housewife living off his supposed hard work. Little did she know how much she had been deceived by his lies. I gave her a blank look, took the papers, and walked out, my mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. I could hardly wait to see how this all played out. My name is Kelly, and I'm 26 years old. What people like Janet don't know is that I'm not just a housewife. In fact, I run my own online education business, which I started from scratch. I'm the CEO, managing a team of employees, and I'm financially independent. The idea that I've been living off Brian's income is laughable because, in reality, I'm the one keeping this house afloat. But that was something Brian never wanted anyone to know. Instead, he went around telling people that I was just a stay-at-home wife, someone who did little more than cook and clean. 2 years ago, Brian and I got married, and at first everything seemed great. He told people he had an important job at a major corporation, but the truth was far less glamorous. Brian was a contract worker, barely scraping by. The few $100s he contributed to our household expenses were a fraction of what I earned, yet he convinced everyone that he was the one in charge, and I was just the wife in the background. It was frustrating, but I let it go, at least at first. At home, Brian treated me as if I was nothing more than a housekeeper. He never helped with the chores, not even on weekends when I was juggling my business and household duties. He'd come home, plop down on the couch, and act like he was entitled to a break while I barely had a moment to myself. When I asked him to help, he'd smile and say, "Come on, Kelly, out of respect for your husband, just let me relax. You know how tough my job is." It wasn't just the chores, though. The lies he told his family hurt the most. He told his mom, Janet, that I barely worked, implying that I was just a burden he had to support. Janet believed every word. She constantly criticized me, saying things like, "My son works so hard, and you don't even do your part as a wife. Why did he marry a woman who doesn't contribute?" I tried to explain to her several times that I worked just as much as Brian, if not more, but she wouldn't listen. She'd roll her eyes and mock me, assuming I spent my days lounging around. I kept hoping Brian would stand up for me, tell his mom the truth, but he never did. He brushed it off, telling me, "Just ignore her. She's old and doesn't mean any harm," but I knew better. His lies had given her the ammunition she needed to keep insulting me. Despite all this, I couldn't bring myself to file for divorce. There was a time when Brian wasn't like this. Back when we were in college, he was my biggest supporter. I had a classmate named Allison who made my life a living hell. She resented how well I did academically and harassed me constantly. It got so bad that I didn't want to go to class anymore, but Brian was always there to lift me up, reminding me that I was stronger than the bullying. After we graduated, I took a high-pressure job, working long hours and feeling drained every day. Brian encouraged me to start my own business, saying, "Why not use your talents and be your own boss?" Thanks to his encouragement, I started my online education platform, and it quickly became a success. That support he gave me back then made me feel indebted to him. But now, I was starting to see a different side of Brian, a side that used me, manipulated me, and took advantage of my kindness. It wasn't until I stumbled upon something on social media that my decision became clear. One evening, while scrolling through my feed, I came across a post from none other than Allison, the same Allison who had tormented me in college. The post showed her flaunting a brand new designer handbag, captioned, "My boyfriend spoils me." The boyfriend's hand in the photo was wearing a watch that looked all too familiar. A limited edition watch I had given Brian on our first anniversary. Could it be? My heart raced as I scrolled through her feed, my mind connecting the dots. Post after post showed Allison with expensive gifts, luxurious vacations, and fancy dinners. Brian had been telling me he was attending employee training programs, but the dates lined up with Allison's posts. He wasn't going to work. He was with her. I was furious, but not in the way I had expected. It wasn't a fiery rage, but more of a cold, quiet realization. Brian had not only been lying about his job, but he had also been lying about us. The years of me carrying our household financially, dealing with his mother's insults, Farzrenia, and supporting him all seemed like a waste, and yet I felt an odd sense of relief. Finally, I had the clarity I needed. I contacted a private investigator to gather proof, and it didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. Brian wasn't attending any business school or employee training. Instead, he was taking trips with Allison, using the money I earned to shower her with gifts. The betrayal stung, but it also set me free. I knew then that it was time to leave him. I secretly leased a new apartment and started moving my things little by little. Brian didn't suspect a thing. I waited for the perfect moment, which came when Brian told me he'd be away for a week for another training camp. I knew this was just another lie, and he was actually going on another vacation with Allison. While he was gone, I finished moving out, leaving nothing behind but the divorce papers. On the day Brian left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was ready to move on, ready to start the next chapter of my life without him. I packed the last of my things, but just as I was about to leave, the doorbell rang. It was Janet, showing up unannounced as usual. "Look, Kelly," she said, barging into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Brian got me this." She held up the exact same designer bag I had seen in Allison's post. The nerve of this woman was unbelievable. "What has Brian given you lately?" she asked with a smug smile, knowing full well that Brian hadn't given me anything in ages. I stared at her, feeling nothing but pity. "Nothing," I replied. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He gives you nothing because you deserve nothing. You're just a freeloader after all." I smiled to myself, knowing how wrong she was. Soon, she would learn the truth. But instead of arguing, I stayed silent. Janet continued to ramble about how Brian had paid for renovations on her house and bought her new appliances, all with the money I had been earning and putting toward our household. And then she did something I wasn't expecting. She pulled out a set of divorce papers from her bag and slammed them on the table. "You've been nothing but a burden to Brian. Sign these and leave. We don't need you." I couldn't help but chuckle. "You're right," I said, picking up the pen and signing the papers without hesitation. "Thank you for everything." I handed the papers back to her, grabbed the last of my things, and left the house without looking back. I moved into my new apartment that same day, filing the divorce papers at City Hall on my way. As I settled into my new place, a beautiful luxury apartment that Brian and Janet had no idea about, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I was living life on my own terms. But just a few days later, the phone calls started. Brian was back from his training camp and clearly panicking. "Kelly, where are you? Why aren't you home?" he demanded. "I'm not coming back," I said calmly. "We're divorced." "What? Divorced? What are you talking about?" He sounded shocked, as if he had no idea what was happening. "Your mother gave me the divorce papers and I signed them. I already filed them, Brian. It's over," I replied. "But there's only $500 left in our account. I can't live on that," he cried. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, hanging up the phone with a sense of finality. A week later, Brian requested a formal meeting through his lawyer. I knew this was coming. When I arrived, I wasn't surprised to see Janet there too, her face filled with anger and confusion. Brian looked defeated as he started speaking. "Kelly, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. My mom, she pushed me into a lot of things. Please, can we cancel the divorce and start over?" he pleaded. I shook my head. "No, Brian, this is done. I've moved on." Suddenly, Brian's tone changed. His face twisted